They said it couldn't be done. Harvard's most brilliant mathematicians declared it impossible. But Elena Rodriguez didn't hear the word impossible the same way others did. To her, it sounded like an invitation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence in the basement apartment was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of fingertips against worn wooden beads. Elena Rodriguez sat cross-legged on a threadbare carpet, her fingers dancing across an abacus her grandmother had brought from Mexico 40 years ago. The beads clicked and slid with the precision of a pianist's hands, each movement calculated, each sound telling a story that only Elena could read. At 17, Elena had never seen a mathematical equation written on paper. She had never watched a teacher draw diagrams on a whiteboard or observed the graceful arc of a parabola sketched in chalk. But in her mind, mathematics lived as something far more vivid than any visual representation could ever be. Numbers had texture. Equations had rhythm. Geometric shapes pulsed with their own heartbeat. The apartment where Elena spent most of her waking hours was a monument to making do. The walls were painted a color her mother described as hopeful yellow, though the paint had begun to peel near the ceiling where winter moisture had left its mark. A single window faced an alley, where delivery trucks rumbled past at all hours, their engines providing a constant low rumble that Elena had learned to tune out years ago. Her bedroom doubled as her study space, workspace, and sanctuary. Against one wall stood a bookshelf filled with volumes in Braille, their spines thick and imposing. Mathematical texts that had cost her mother 2 months of overtime wages sat beside poetry collections and science fiction novels that Elena devoured during rare moments of rest. The books were her teachers, her companions, her windows into worlds where blindness was irrelevant and intellect was the only currency that mattered. Elena's mother, Carmen Rodriguez, worked 3 jobs to keep their small family afloat. She cleaned office buildings before dawn, stocked shelves at a grocery store during the afternoon, and spent evenings caring for elderly residents at a nursing home across town. Carmen's hands were perpetually dry from industrial cleaning chemicals, her back ached from lifting and bending, and her feet swelled from standing for 14 hours a day. But she never complained, at least not where Elena could hear. The mathematics that consumed Elena's thoughts had first revealed itself during her childhood in ways that seemed almost magical. While other children her age struggled with basic arithmetic, Elena could perform complex calculations in her head faster than most adults could with a calculator. She discovered patterns in everything: the spacing of raindrops on the window, the rhythm of her mother's footsteps climbing the stairs, the intervals between car horns in traffic below. By age 10, Elena had exhausted every mathematics textbook the local library could provide in Braille. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had taken a special interest in the quiet girl who arrived every Tuesday afternoon with a worn canvas bag, ready to exchange one set of mathematical mysteries for another. Mrs. Patterson had contacted universities, research institutions, and specialized programs, searching for resources that could challenge Elena's exceptional mind. The answers that came back were always the same. Elena needed formal education, structured curriculum, qualified instructors. She needed to be in a classroom where she could interact with peers and receive proper guidance. But Elena's family couldn't afford private schools for the blind, and the public schools in her district had already informed Carmen that they lacked the resources to adequately serve a student with Elena's unique combination of disability and intellectual giftedness. So Elena taught herself. She converted every mathematical concept into a language she could understand through touch, sound, and spatial reasoning. Algebra became a series of balanced equations she could feel with her hands, using household objects to represent variables and constants. Geometry transformed into three-dimensional puzzles she constructed from cardboard and tape, her fingers tracing angles and exploring the relationships between shapes that her classmates could only perceive. Visually, the abacus had become her closest companion and most trusted tool. Her grandmother had taught her to use it when Elena was barely tall enough to reach the kitchen table, and over the years it had evolved from a simple counting device into something approaching an extension of Elena's consciousness. She could perform calculations on it that would challenge graduate students, her fingers moving with such speed and precision that the clicking beads sounded like rapid-fire percussion. Trigonometry arrived in Elena's life through the back door of music theory. She had discovered that the mathematical relationships governing musical harmony were identical to the wave functions she was studying in her advanced physics texts. Late at night, while her mother slept between shifts, Elena would sit at their old upright piano, working out complex trigonometric problems by playing chord progressions and listening to how the mathematical relationships expressed themselves in sound. The piano had been a gift from Mrs. Patterson, who had convinced a church to donate the aging instrument when they upgraded their sanctuary. Carmen had worried about the space it would take up in their already cramped apartment, but Eleanor had fallen in love with it immediately. The piano gave her mathematics a voice, transforming abstract concepts into melodies she could hear and feel reverberating through the wooden floor. Elena's mathematical education followed no traditional curriculum. She jumped from basic algebra to advanced calculus based on whatever resources she could obtain, creating her own roadmap through the landscape of mathematical knowledge. She taught herself differential equations by modeling the cooling rate of her morning coffee. She mastered statistical analysis by tracking patterns in the bus schedules outside her window. She developed an intuitive understanding of chaos theory by listening to the seemingly random but ultimately predictable sounds of the city around her. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Eleanor had no classmates to study with, no teachers to answer her questions, no peers who could understand the excitement she felt when she solved a particularly elegant problem. Her mathematical discoveries happened in solitude, celebrated only by the satisfaction of understanding and the soft licking of abacus beads, returning to their starting positions. Carmen worried constantly about her daughter's future. She saw Elena's brilliance, recognized that her child possessed gifts that could open doors to opportunities beyond anything their family had ever imagined. But she also saw the barriers, the lack of formal credentials, the absence of traditional educational pathways, the simple, brutal reality that the world wasn't designed to accommodate someone like Elena. During her rare free moments, Carmen would sit beside Elena as she worked through mathematical problems, watching her daughter's fingers dance across the abacus with movements too quick to follow. Carmen couldn't understand the mathematics, but she could see the joy on Elena's face when a solution emerged. The way her daughter's entire body would relax when a difficult concept finally clicked into place. The apartment's thin walls meant that Elena could hear everything happening in the building around her. The couple upstairs argued about money every Thursday night. The elderly man next door played the same 3 songs on his guitar every morning at exactly 7:15. The family across the hall had a baby who cried with impressive consistency between 2 and 4 in the morning. Elena had mapped out the acoustic patterns of her world with the same precision she applied to mathematical theorems. Sound had become Eleanor's primary way of navigating not just her physical environment, but the abstract realm of mathematical concepts as well. She had developed a personal vocabulary of audio cues that helped her organize and manipulate complex equations Different types of problems had different rhythmic signatures. Polynomial functions sounded smooth and flowing when she worked through them mentally. Discrete mathematics had a staccato quality that reminded her of rain on the roof. Calculus problems hummed with continuous variation, like wind through trees. Elena's daily routine began before sunrise, when the city was quiet enough for her to concentrate without distraction. She would wake at 5:30, make herself coffee with the precision of a chemist measuring reagents, and settle at her desk with whatever mathematical challenge had captured her attention the previous day. The morning hours were her most productive, when her mind felt clearest and the complex relationships between mathematical concepts seemed most transparent. The desk itself was a masterpiece of organization that would have impressed any professional mathematician. Elena had developed a system for arranging her materials that allowed her to locate any tool or reference text within seconds. Braille. Mathematics required specialized notation that was far more complex than standard Braille text, and Elena had taught herself to read and write mathematical expressions with a fluency that surpassed many sighted students. Her mathematical notebooks were works of art in their own right. Using a special stylus and metal template, Elena could create precise Braille representations of complex equations, geometric diagrams, and statistical charts. Each page was laid out with careful attention to spatial relationships, ensuring that mathematical expressions maintained their proper structure and hierarchy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These notebooks contained years of Elena's mathematical explorations, problems she had solved, theorems she had derived, and questions that continued to intrigue her. The internet had opened new possibilities for Elena's mathematical education. Though accessing online resources presented its own challenges, screen reading software could handle basic text, but mathematical notation often appeared as meaningless strings of characters. Elena had learned to work around these limitations, developing strategies for extracting mathematical content from online sources and translating it into formats she could use. Online forums had become Elena's closest approximation to classroom interaction. She participated in mathematical discussion groups where her blindness was irrelevant and her insights were valued purely on their intellectual merit. Other forum members knew her only as Math Melody, a username that reflected her synesthetic experience of mathematics as music. Her contributions to complex discussions often surprised other participants with their depth and originality. The local university library had become Elena's second home during high school years. Carmen had arranged for Elena to have special borrowing privileges that allowed her to access graduate-level mathematics texts that weren't available elsewhere in the city. The librarians had grown accustomed to seeing Elena arrive every Saturday morning with a list of specific titles, usually books that would challenge most doctoral students. Elena's relationship with mathematical proofs was particularly intimate, while other students might visualize geometric relationships or sketch diagrams to understand complex theorems. Elena had to construct proofs entirely through logical reasoning and spatial intuition. This constraint had actually strengthened her mathematical thinking, forcing her to develop rigorous mental models that didn't rely on visual aids or shortcuts. The beauty of mathematics for Elena lay precisely in its independence from sensory experience. While she couldn't see the elegant curve of a mathematical function or the symmetrical pattern of a geometric proof, she could feel the logical structure that gave these concepts their power. Mathematics was pure thought made manifest, and blindness couldn't diminish the crystalline clarity of mathematical truth. Elena's most profound mathematical insights often came during her evening walks around the neighborhood. Carmen had initially worried about letting Elena navigate the city streets independently, but Elena had developed navigation skills that bordered on supernatural. She could identify her location by the ambient sounds, air currents, and subtle changes in acoustics that reflected off buildings and other structures. These walks served as moving meditation sessions where Elena's mind could wander freely through mathematical landscapes. Without the need to focus on reading or writing, she could let complex problems percolate in her subconscious, often returning home with solutions to questions that had puzzled her for weeks. The rhythmic sound of her footsteps seemed to help organize her thoughts, providing a steady beat against which mathematical ideas could arrange themselves. The neighborhood where Elena lived was a mixture of working-class families, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and young people who couldn't afford to live anywhere else in the city. It wasn't the kind of place where mathematical genius was expected to flourish, but Elena had found acceptance and support from unlikely sources. The corner grocery store owner always had a friendly word for her and had learned to describe new products in terms that helped Elena shop independently. The postal worker who delivered mail to their building would often stop to chat about Elena's college plans, offering encouragement and practical advice about applications and financial aid. Elena's mathematical ability had attracted attention from various sources over the years. Math teachers from local high schools had heard about the blind girl who was teaching herself calculus and had reached out offering assistance. A few professors from the regional university had volunteered to mentor Elena, though scheduling conflicts and transportation challenges had made consistent meetings difficult. The most significant contact had come from Dr. Sarah Chen, a mathematics professor who had learned about Elena through Mrs. Patterson at the library. Dr. Chen specialized in abstract algebra and had immediately recognized that Elena's mathematical intuition went far beyond typical high school level work. She had begun corresponding with Elena via email, sending challenging problems and engaging in discussions about advanced mathematical concepts. Dr. Chen's encouragement had planted the first seeds of an impossible dream, that Elena might somehow find a way to pursue mathematics at the university level. The obstacles seemed insurmountable. Elena had never attended formal high school, had no official transcripts or standardized test scores, and lacked the financial resources for university tuition. But Dr. Chen had seen something in Elena's mathematical reasoning that convinced her the young woman belonged in an academic environment where her gifts could be properly developed. The correspondence with Dr. Chen had introduced Elena to current research in pure mathematics, areas of study that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Elena discovered that mathematicians were working on problems that had remained unsolved for decades or even centuries, questions so complex that the world's most brilliant minds could only chip away at their edges. The idea that mathematics still contained mysteries, that there were frontiers yet to be explored, filled Elena with excitement that was almost physical in its intensity. Elena's mathematical notebooks from this period reflected her growing sophistication and ambition. She was no longer content to simply solve textbook problems or work through established theorems. She began developing her own mathematical questions, exploring areas where her unique perspective might offer insights that traditional approaches had missed. Her blindness, which had initially seemed like an obstacle to mathematical study, was beginning to reveal itself as a source of alternative understanding. The transformation in Elena's thinking wasn't immediately obvious to those around her. Carmen noticed that her daughter seemed more focused and energetic, spending even longer hours at her desk with an intensity that was both inspiring and slightly worrying. Elena's conversations became peppered with references to mathematical concepts that Carmen couldn't begin to understand, but the excitement in Elena's voice was unmistakable. Elena had begun to dream about mathematical structures in ways that seemed to transcend normal human experience. In her sleep, she would navigate through geometric spaces that existed only in her imagination, exploring the relationships between abstract objects that had no physical reality. She would wake with clear memories of these mathematical dreams, often finding that problems she had been struggling with during her waking hours had resolved themselves in her subconscious. The piano had become an increasingly important tool in Elena's mathematical explorations. She had discovered that complex mathematical relationships could be expressed through musical improvisation with chord progressions and melodic patterns, serving as auditory representations of abstract concepts. Her neighbors had grown accustomed to hearing strange, atonal compositions drifting through the thin apartment walls, not realizing they were listening to the musical expression of advanced mathematical theorems. Elena's isolation from traditional academic environments had forced her to develop mathematical intuition in ways that formal education might have constrained. Without textbooks telling her which problems were considered difficult or impossible, Elena approached mathematical questions with a naivety that was actually liberating. She didn't know what wasn't supposed to be solvable, so she attempted solutions that more conventional students might have dismissed as impossible. The local coffee shop had become Elena's occasional retreat when the apartment felt too confining. The owner, Mr. Kowalski, had grown fond of the serious young woman who would sit for hours at a corner table, her fingers moving across braille texts and mathematical tools with focused intensity. He had learned not to disturb Elena when she was working, recognizing the signs of deep concentration that meant she was wrestling with particularly complex problems. Elena's mathematical development had been shaped by necessity into something that was both more limited and more profound than traditional academic training. She had missed many of the standard topics that appeared in typical curricula, but she had developed extraordinary depth in the areas that captured her interest. Her understanding of mathematical concepts was intuitive and personal in ways that formal education rarely achieved. The question of Elena's future had become increasingly urgent as she approached her 18th birthday. Carmen knew that her daughter's mathematical abilities were exceptional, but she also understood that the path from their basement apartment to a career in mathematics was far from clear. Elena needed formal credentials, official recognition, and access to advanced resources that their family simply couldn't provide. Elena herself had begun to research university programs and graduate schools, trying to understand what would be required for someone in her situation to gain admission to academic institutions. The more she learned about traditional admissions processes, the more daunting the challenge appeared. Universities wanted transcripts, test scores, recommendations from teachers, and evidence of formal coursework that Elena simply didn't possess. But Elena had also discovered that mathematics, perhaps more than any other field, valued results over credentials. Mathematical truth didn't care about degrees or institutional affiliations. A correct proof was correct, regardless of who had developed it, and mathematical insights could come from anywhere. This realization had begun to crystallize into something that might have been called a plan, though Elena herself wasn't yet ready to articulate what she was contemplating. The mathematical problem that would change Elena's life was still waiting to be discovered, hidden in research papers and academic journals that she hadn't yet encountered. But the foundation for that discovery was being laid during these solitary months of intense study, as Elena's unique perspective on mathematical relationships continued to develop in directions that no traditional education could have predicted. Elena's mother had noticed the change in her daughter's energy and focus. Carmen couldn't understand the mathematics that consumed Elena's attention, but she could see that her daughter was building towards something significant. Elena's questions, had become more specific and urgent. She wanted to know about university libraries, about research facilities, about the practical details of academic life that seemed far removed from their current circumstances. The apartment that had served as Elena's mathematical laboratory for so many years was beginning to feel too small for the ideas that were developing within its walls. Elena's notebooks were filled with explorations that pushed into territory that even Dr. Chen found challenging to follow. Her correspondence with the university professor had evolved from mentorship into something approaching collaboration. As Elena's insights began to illuminate aspects of mathematical problems that Dr. Chen hadn't considered. Elena's daily routine had intensified to the point where Carmen sometimes worried about her daughter's health. Elena would work through mathematical problems for 12 or 14 hours at a stretch, stopping only when physical exhaustion forced her to rest. Her mathematical explorations had become all-consuming, driven by an internal urgency that Elena herself couldn't fully explain. The mathematical notebooks from this period would later be recognized as containing some of the most original mathematical thinking to emerge from outside traditional academic institutions. But at the time, they were simply the private explorations of a young woman who had taught herself to see mathematical relationships in ways that formal education had never imagined. Elena was preparing, though she didn't yet know it, to encounter a problem that Harvard's most brilliant mathematicians had declared impossible to solve. The stage was being set for a confrontation between institutional authority and individual insight, between the established boundaries of mathematical knowledge and the limitless curiosity of a mind that had never learned to accept those boundaries as permanent. Elena Rodriguez was ready to prove that impossibility was just another word for a problem that hadn't yet met the right perspective. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while Elena was working through a particularly stubborn topology problem that had kept her awake for 3 consecutive nights. The soft chime of her computer's notification system barely registered in her consciousness as she manipulated abstract mathematical objects in her mind, searching for connections that seemed to hover just beyond her grasp. Dr. Sarah Chen's message sat unopened in Elena's inbox for nearly 6 hours, competing for attention with the mathematical puzzle that had consumed her thoughts. When Elena finally took a break to check her correspondence, expecting routine updates from the mathematical forums she frequented, she found instead an invitation that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her life. The subject line was deceptively simple: research opportunity, your input needed. But as Elena's screen reader processed the message content, she realized that Dr. Chen was offering something far more significant than the usual exchange of mathematical insights they had shared over the past 2 years. Dr. Chen had been selected to participate in a collaborative research project involving several prestigious institutions, including Harvard University, MIT, and Princeton. The project centered on what the mathematical community had termed the dimensional convergence conjecture, a theoretical framework that attempted to describe the behavior of mathematical objects in spaces with non-integer dimensions. The conjecture had attracted attention because it promised to bridge gaps between several previously unconnected areas of mathematics, potentially revolutionizing how mathematicians understood the fundamental nature of geometric relationships. The problem had emerged from the intersection of fractal geometry, algebraic topology, and advanced number theory. Traditional mathematical approaches had failed to make meaningful progress on the conjecture, despite intensive efforts by some of the world's most accomplished mathematicians. The collaborative research project represented a last-ditch attempt to solve what many had begun to consider an impossible problem. Dr. Chen's invitation was both thrilling and terrifying. She was asking Elena to contribute to the research effort, to join a team of established academics in tackling a problem that had stumped the mathematical establishment. The invitation carried implicit recognition of Elena's abilities, acknowledgement that her unconventional perspective might offer insights that traditional approaches had missed. Elena read the message 3 times before its full implications began to sink in. Dr. Chen wasn't offering charity or attempting to provide educational opportunities for a disadvantaged student. She was making a genuine request for Elena's mathematical input on a research problem that had serious academic significance. The invitation represented Elena's first real chance to engage with the cutting edge of mathematical research, to test her abilities against problems that existed at the absolute frontier of human knowledge. The dimensional convergence conjecture itself was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its complexity. It proposed that mathematical objects existing in fractional dimensions would exhibit convergent behavior under specific transformational conditions, creating stable patterns that could be described through a unified theoretical framework. The conjecture suggested that these convergent patterns would follow predictable mathematical rules, potentially revealing deep connections between apparently unrelated areas of mathematics. Previous attempts to prove or disprove the conjecture had founded on the technical difficulties involved in working with non-integer dimensional spaces. Traditional mathematical tools seemed inadequate for the task, and researchers had struggled to develop new approaches that could handle the conjecture's unique requirements. The problem had acquired a reputation within the mathematical community as being potentially unsolvable, a theoretical curiosity that might forever remain beyond human comprehension. Elena's response to Dr. Chen's invitation was immediate and enthusiastic, though she tried to maintain professional composure in her reply. She expressed interest in contributing to the research project while honestly acknowledging her lack of formal academic credentials. Dr. Chen's response came within hours, dismissing Elena's concerns about credentials and emphasizing that the research team was interested in results, not academic pedigree. The research collaboration would be conducted primarily through digital communication, with team members sharing findings, insights, and partial solutions through a secure online platform. Elena would have access to the same research materials and technical resources as her more formally credentialed colleagues, leveling the playing field in ways that traditional academic environments never could. Elena's first week as a member of the research team was simultaneously exhilarating and humbling. The online platform contained years of accumulated research on the dimensional convergence conjecture, including failed proof attempts, partial solutions, and theoretical explorations that represented thousands of hours of work by some of the world's most accomplished mathematicians. Elena found herself swimming in an ocean of mathematical complexity that dwarfed anything she had previously encountered. The research team included Dr. Marcus Williamson from Harvard, whose work on advanced geometric theory had earned international recognition. Dr. Williamson's approach to the conjecture emphasized rigorous logical analysis and systematic exploration of the mathematical relationships involved. His contributions to the project were methodical and comprehensive, building carefully constructed arguments that advanced understanding incrementally. From MIT came Dr. Jennifer Liu, a specialist in computational mathematics who had developed innovative algorithms for exploring high-dimensional mathematical spaces. Dr. Liu's work focused on using computer-assisted analysis to test specific cases of the conjecture, searching for counterexamples or patterns that might provide insight into the general problem. Princeton's representative was Dr. Antonio Valdez, whose expertise in abstract algebra had made him one of the leading authorities on the mathematical structures underlying the conjecture. Dr. Valdez approached the problem from a highly theoretical perspective, seeking to understand the fundamental algebraic relationships that governed the behavior of objects in fractional dimensions. Elena quickly realized that each team member brought a distinct perspective to the research problem, representing different mathematical traditions and methodological approaches. Dr. Williamson's geometric intuition, Dr. Liu's computational power, and Dr. Valdez's algebraic sophistication created a formidable intellectual alliance that had already made significant progress toward understanding the conjecture's implications. Elena's role within this accomplished team was initially unclear. She possessed neither Dr. Williamson's geometric expertise, nor Dr. Liu's computational resources, nor Dr. Valdez's theoretical sophistication. What Elena offered instead was a fundamentally different way of experiencing mathematical relationships, a perspective shaped by years of navigating mathematical concepts through non-visual intuition. Her first contribution to the research project came through careful analysis of the team's previous work. Elena spent weeks studying the accumulated research, absorbing the various approaches that had been attempted and identifying subtle patterns that seemed to connect disparate elements of the investigation. Her mathematical notebooks filled with observations and insights that emerged from her unique perspective on the problem. Elena's breakthrough moment arrived while she was working through Dr. Valdez's algebraic analysis of the conjecture's fundamental structures. Traditional approaches had focused on understanding how mathematical objects behaved within fractional dimensional spaces, treating the non-integer dimensions as fixed parameters that constrained the behavior of geometric forms. Elena's insight was deceptively simple, but potentially revolutionary. Instead of treating fractional dimensions as fixed constraints, she began to consider what would happen if the dimensions themselves were treated as dynamic variables that could change over time. This perspective suggested that mathematical objects in fractional dimensions might not simply exist within those spaces, but might actively participate in defining the dimensional characteristics of their environment. The implications of this insight were staggering. If dimensions could be treated as dynamic rather than static, then the entire framework for understanding the dimensional convergence conjecture would need to be reconsidered. Traditional mathematical tools that assumed fixed dimensional parameters would become inadequate, requiring the development of entirely new analytical approaches. Elena's initial exploration of dynamic dimensional theory occupied 3 intense weeks of nearly continuous work. She developed preliminary mathematical frameworks for describing how dimensional parameters might change over time, creating notation systems that could handle the complex relationships between variable dimensions and the mathematical objects that existed within them. Her work progressed entirely through mental manipulation and tactile notation systems, without access to the sophisticated visualization tools that her colleagues used to explore high-dimensional mathematical relationships. Elena's reliance on abstract reasoning and spatial intuition forced her to develop mathematical insights that didn't depend on visual representation, creating understanding that was both more limited and more profound than traditional approaches. The mathematical framework Elena developed during this period would later be recognized as representing a fundamental advance in dimensional theory. But at the time, she was simply following mathematical curiosity wherever it led, exploring connections and relationships that seemed natural from her unique perspective. Elena's first presentation of her dynamic dimensional theory to the research team provoked responses that ranged from skepticism to excitement. Dr. Williamson expressed concern that Elena's approach might be too radical, departing too far from established mathematical principles to be practically useful. Dr. Liu was intrigued by the computational possibilities that dynamic dimensions might offer, but worried about the technical challenges involved in implementing Elena's theoretical framework. Dr. Valdez's response was the most encouraging. As an expert in abstract algebra, he immediately recognized the elegance of Elena's approach and its potential for revealing previously hidden mathematical relationships. He offered to collaborate with Elena on developing the algebraic foundations necessary to support her theoretical insights. The collaboration between Elena and Dr. Valdez proved to be extraordinarily productive. Elena's intuitive understanding of dimensional relationships complemented Dr. Valdez's technical expertise in algebraic manipulation, creating an intellectual partnership that generated insights neither could have achieved independently. Their joint work began to reveal mathematical structures that traditional approaches had completely missed. Elena's mathematical notebooks from this period documented a rapid evolution in her understanding of advanced mathematical concepts. Working with Dr. Valdez exposed her to sophisticated algebraic techniques that she had never encountered in her self-directed studies, while her unique perspective challenged Dr. Valdez to reconsider fundamental assumptions about dimensional mathematics that he had never questioned. The breakthrough that would ultimately lead to Elena's confrontation with Harvard's mathematical establishment emerged from a seemingly routine calculation that Elena was performing to test a specific case of her dynamic dimensional theory. She was exploring how certain geometric objects would behave under dimensional transitions, working through mathematical relationships that required extensive algebraic manipulation. Elena's calculation revealed something unexpected. Under specific conditions, mathematical objects in fractional dimensions would exhibit convergent behavior that created stable patterns matching exactly what the dimensional convergence conjecture predicted. But Elena's approach suggested that this convergence occurred through mechanisms that were fundamentally different from anything the mathematical community had previously considered. Traditional attempts to prove the conjecture had assumed that convergent behavior would emerge from the intrinsic properties of mathematical objects existing within fractional dimensional spaces. Elena's dynamic dimensional theory suggested instead that convergence occurred through interactions between the objects and the dimensional spaces themselves, with dimensions and objects mutually influencing each other's behavior. This insight opened entirely new avenues for understanding the conjecture. Instead of trying to prove that mathematical objects would exhibit convergent behavior within fixed fractional dimensions, Elena could demonstrate that dimensional dynamics naturally produced the convergent patterns that the conjecture described. Her approach transformed an impossibly complex problem into something that could be analyzed through relatively straightforward mathematical techniques. Elena's proof of the dimensional convergence conjecture occupied another month of intensive work. She developed the mathematical machinery necessary to handle dynamic dimensional relationships, created notation systems that could describe the complex interactions between dimensions and mathematical objects, and worked through the logical steps required to demonstrate that convergent behavior was not just possible, but inevitable under the conditions the conjecture specified. The proof itself was unlike anything that had appeared in mathematical literature. Elena's approach required readers to conceptualize mathematical relationships in ways that traditional mathematical education had never emphasized. Her proof relied heavily on spatial intuition and abstract reasoning rather than visual representation or computational verification. Dr. Valdez served as Elena's primary collaborator during the proof development process, helping to translate Elena's intuitive insights into rigorous mathematical language that could be verified and understood by the broader mathematical community. Their collaboration produced a proof that was both mathematically sound and conceptually revolutionary. Elena's completion of the proof represented more than just a solution to a specific mathematical problem. Her success demonstrated that fundamental advances in mathematics could emerge from perspectives that existed outside traditional academic institutions. Her work suggested that the mathematical community might be overlooking valuable insights by restricting serious research opportunities to formally credentialed academics. The research team's initial response to Elena's proof was a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Dr. Williamson, Dr. Liu, and Dr. Valdez spent weeks verifying Elena's mathematical arguments, checking each logical step and exploring the implications of her dynamic dimensional theory. Their analysis confirmed that Elena's proof was mathematically valid and that her approach offered genuine insights into the nature of fractional dimensional mathematics. Dr. Chen's role during this period was crucial in helping Elena navigate the complex process of presenting mathematical research to the academic community. Elena's proof would need to undergo peer review by experts in dimensional mathematics, a process that could be challenging for someone without formal academic credentials. Dr. Chen provided guidance on how to structure the proof presentation and how to address potential criticisms from established mathematicians. The decision to submit Elena's proof to the Journal of Advanced Mathematical Theory represented a significant risk for everyone involved. Elena would be presenting herself as a serious mathematical researcher despite lacking traditional qualifications, while her collaborators would be associating their reputations with work produced outside normal academic channels. Elena's proof submission to the journal included extensive documentation of her mathematical background and self-directed education. She provided detailed explanations of how she had developed her understanding of advanced mathematical concepts and how her unique perspective had contributed to solving the dimensional convergence conjecture. The submission represented Elena's formal introduction to the mathematical research community. The peer review process for Elena's proof would prove to be more contentious than anyone anticipated. While some reviewers recognized the mathematical validity and conceptual importance of Elena's work, others questioned whether someone without formal mathematical training could possibly have solved a problem that had stumped established experts. The debate that emerged around Elena's proof would ultimately extend far beyond technical mathematical considerations. Elena's success in proving the dimensional convergence conjecture established her as a serious mathematical researcher, but it also set the stage for a confrontation with institutional authority that would test both her mathematical abilities and her personal resilience. The mathematical community was about to discover that genius could emerge from the most unexpected places, challenging fundamental assumptions about who deserved to be taken seriously as a mathematical thinker. The proof that Elena had developed in her basement apartment was about to collide with the institutional prestige of Harvard University, creating a conflict that would ultimately transform both Elena's life and the mathematical community's understanding of where important research could originate. Elena Rodriguez was ready to prove that mathematical truth was more powerful than academic credentials, but she had no idea how difficult that proof would be to establish. The rejection letter from Harvard arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, printed on letterhead so pristine it seemed to mock the cramped apartment where Elena received it. Dr. Marcus Williamson's signature appeared at the bottom of 2 paragraphs that dismissed months of Elena's work with clinical precision. The Department of Mathematics at Harvard University could not accept her proof of the dimensional convergence conjecture for publication in their quarterly research journal. The reasoning was as predictable as it was devastating. Elena's screen, Reader processed the rejection with mechanical indifference, converting Dr. Williamson's carefully worded dismissal into synthesized speech that filled the small apartment with institutional condescension. The mathematical content of Elena's proof was not in question, the letter acknowledged. Several independent reviewers had verified her logical arguments and confirmed the validity of her approach to dynamic dimensional theory. However, the letter continued, Harvard's standards for mathematical publication required evidence of formal academic training that Elena simply could not provide. The university's position was presented as a matter of maintaining scholarly rigor and protecting the integrity of mathematical research. Elena's lack of traditional credentials, her absence from recognized academic institutions, and her unconventional mathematical background raised questions about whether her work met the standards expected from serious mathematical researchers. The letter suggested that Elena might benefit from pursuing formal education before attempting to contribute to advanced mathematical research. Elena's initial response to the rejection was a silence so complete that even the ambient sounds of the city seemed to fade into background noise. She sat motionless at her desk for nearly an hour, processing emotions that ranged from disappointment to rage to something approaching despair. The mathematical proof that had consumed months of her life, that had solved a problem considered impossible by the world's leading experts, had been dismissed not for any flaw in her reasoning, but for her failure to conform to academic expectations. Carmen found Elena still sitting at her desk when she returned from her morning shift at the grocery store. The rejection letter lay open beside Elena's computer, its formal language a stark contrast to the mathematical notebooks that surrounded it. Carmen couldn't understand the technical details of what had happened, but she recognized the devastation in her daughter's posture and the way Elena's hands remained motionless on the desk where they would normally be engaged in constant mathematical activity. Elena's explanation of the rejection came in halting sentences that struggled to capture the full scope of what had occurred. She had solved a mathematical problem that Harvard's own faculty had declared impossible, but the university refused to acknowledge her work because she lacked proper academic credentials. The mathematical community that Elena had dreamed of joining had essentially told her that brilliance without institutional validation was worthless. The days following Harvard's rejection were among the darkest in Elena's life. She found herself unable to concentrate on mathematical problems that had previously captured her complete attention. The elegant equations that had once filled her thoughts with excitement now seemed pointless. Academic exercises that would never be taken seriously by the people whose opinions mattered. Elena's mathematical notebooks remained closed, their pages filled with insights that apparently had no value in the world beyond her apartment. Dr. Sarah Chen's response to news of the rejection was immediate and furious. She had spent weeks advocating for Elena's work within her own institution, preparing colleagues for the recognition that Elena's breakthrough deserved. Dr. Chen understood better than most how revolutionary Elena's approach to dimensional mathematics actually was, and she recognized that Harvard's rejection represented institutional prejudice rather than legitimate scholarly concerns. The mathematical research community's reaction to Harvard's rejection of Elena's proof created the first cracks in what had previously been unified institutional resistance to recognizing work produced outside traditional academic channels. Several prominent mathematicians expressed public disagreement with Harvard's decision, arguing that mathematical truth should be evaluated independently of its source. Dr. Jennifer Liu from MIT wrote a particularly pointed response questioning whether Harvard's standards were protecting scholarly integrity or simply maintaining exclusionary practices. Elena's proof began to circulate informally through mathematical networks that existed outside official academic publications. Researchers who had access to Elena's work shared it with colleagues, discussed its implications in private communications, and began to explore the mathematical techniques that Elena had developed. A growing community of mathematicians was becoming convinced that Elena's dynamic dimensional theory represented a genuine breakthrough that deserved serious attention. The informal circulation of Elena's work created an unusual situation within the mathematical research community. Elena's proof was being discussed and analyzed by experts around the world, but it lacked the official recognition that would normally accompany such significant mathematical research. The disconnect between Elena's actual influence on mathematical thinking and her formal status within academic institutions highlighted the arbitrary nature of scholarly credentialing systems. Elena's response to this unexpected support was complicated by her continued isolation from the communities where her work was being discussed. She could participate in online forums and correspond with individual researchers, but she remained excluded from the conferences, seminars, and informal gatherings where mathematical ideas were normally debated and developed. Elena was simultaneously a central figure in an important mathematical discussion and completely peripheral to the institutional structures that governed mathematical research. Dr. Antonio Valdez's decision to present Elena's work at the International Conference on Advanced Mathematics represented a significant escalation in the conflict between institutional authority and mathematical insight. Dr. Valdez had become convinced that Elena's dynamic dimensional theory had implications that extended far beyond the original dimensional convergence conjecture, potentially revolutionizing how mathematicians understood the fundamental nature of space and geometric relationships. The conference presentation was carefully structured to emphasize the mathematical content of Elena's work while minimizing discussion of her unconventional background. Dr. Valdez presented Elena's theoretical framework and proof methodology as serious mathematical research that deserved evaluation on its own merits. His presentation avoided mentioning Elena's lack of formal credentials or her self-directed mathematical education. The audience response to Dr. Valdez's presentation was immediate and polarized. Some attendees recognized the elegance and power of Elena's approach, expressing excitement about the new possibilities that dynamic dimensional theory might create for mathematical research. Others questioned whether work produced outside traditional academic structures could meet the rigorous standards required for serious mathematical investigation. Dr. Rebecca Harrison from Oxford University raised the most pointed challenge to Elena's work during the conference question period. Dr. Harrison argued that mathematical research required not just correct answers, but also proper methodology, appropriate citation of previous work, and evidence of comprehensive understanding of relevant mathematical literature. Elena's proof, regardless of its technical correctness, failed to meet these broader scholarly requirements. Dr. Valdez's defense of Elena's work emphasized that mathematical truth was independent of the social structures that governed academic institutions. Elena's proof either was or wasn't mathematically valid, and her lack of formal training was irrelevant to evaluating the logical soundness of her arguments. Dr. Valdez suggested that rejecting Elena's work based on credentialing concerns represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how mathematical knowledge actually developed. The debate that emerged from Dr. Valdez's presentation extended far beyond the specific question of Elena's proof to encompass broader issues about who deserved to be taken seriously as a mathematical researcher. The mathematical community found itself divided between those who valued institutional credentials and traditional training, and those who believed that mathematical insight could emerge from anywhere. Elena learned about the conference presentation through Dr. Chen, who provided detailed summaries of both Dr. Valdez's talk and the discussions that followed. Elena's reaction was a mixture of gratitude for Dr. Valdez's advocacy and frustration at being discussed without being present. Her mathematical work was being debated by people she had never met in venues she could never access, creating a surreal situation where Elena was simultaneously the center of attention and completely excluded from the conversation. The controversy surrounding Elena's work began to attract attention from outside the mathematical research community. Science journalists started investigating the story of the blind teenager whose mathematical breakthrough was being rejected by prestigious universities. Elena's situation became emblematic of broader questions about educational inequality and the barriers that prevented talented individuals from contributing to scientific knowledge. The media attention created new complications for Elena's already difficult situation. Reporters wanted to interview her about her mathematical discoveries and her experiences with academic rejection. But Elena had no experience dealing with public attention. She found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought, expected to speak publicly about technical mathematical concepts that were difficult to explain to non-expert audiences. Elena's first media interview was conducted by phone with a science reporter from a national newspaper. The conversation was challenging for Elena, who struggled to explain dynamic dimensional theory in terms that general readers could understand, while also conveying the significance of her mathematical breakthrough. Elena discovered that communicating mathematical ideas to non-mathematicians required skills that her self-directed education had never developed. The newspaper article that resulted from the interview presented Elena's story as a classic tale of institutional prejudice preventing recognition of genuine talent. The article emphasized Elena's disadvantaged background and her lack of formal educational opportunities, while portraying Harvard and other prestigious universities as elitist institutions that valued credentials over actual ability. Elena found herself characterized as a victim of academic discrimination rather than as a serious mathematical researcher. Elena's discomfort with her media portrayal led her to decline additional interview requests and withdraw from public attention. She preferred to focus on continuing her mathematical research rather than becoming a spokesperson for educational reform or academic access issues. Elena's withdrawal from media engagement frustrated advocates who wanted to use her story to highlight systemic problems in higher education, but Elena prioritized her mathematical work over public activism. The mathematical research community's ongoing debate about Elena's work began to create practical consequences for institutions that had initially dismissed her contributions. Graduate students and junior faculty members started questioning whether they should pursue opportunities at universities that had rejected obviously valuable mathematical research for non-mathematical reasons. Harvard's mathematics department found itself defending a decision that was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Dr. Williamson's position as the primary advocate for rejecting Elena's work became increasingly uncomfortable as more mathematicians expressed support for her approach to dimensional theory. His initial confidence that institutional standards justified rejecting Elena's proof began to waver as he faced criticism from colleagues who argued that Harvard was damaging its reputation by maintaining obviously unreasonable standards for evaluating mathematical research. The growing support for Elena's work within the mathematical community created pressure for formal recognition that existing institutional structures were not equipped to handle. Elena's proof had been mathematically validated by numerous experts, but no traditional academic publication was willing to accept work from someone without proper credentials. The mathematical community found itself in the unusual position of recognizing important research that could not be formally published. Dr. Chen's decision to organize an independent mathematical workshop focused on Elena's dynamic dimensional theory represented an attempt to provide Elena with the kind of formal recognition that traditional academic channels had refused to offer. The workshop would bring together mathematicians from around the world to discuss Elena's theoretical framework and explore its implications for future research. Elena's invitation to participate in Dr. Chen's workshop created both excitement and anxiety. The event would represent Elena's first opportunity to present her mathematical work directly to an audience of expert researchers, but it would also expose her to the kind of rigorous questioning that formal academic presentations typically involved. Elena would need to defend her theoretical framework against challenges from mathematicians who possessed far more formal training than she had received. The weeks leading up to the workshop were intensely stressful for Elena as she prepared to defend her mathematical insights against scrutiny from some of the world's leading experts in dimensional theory. She worked through potential criticisms of her approach, developed more rigorous mathematical foundations for her theoretical framework, and practiced explaining complex concepts in ways that would be accessible to researchers from different mathematical backgrounds. Elena's preparation for the workshop revealed gaps in her mathematical knowledge that her self-directed education had not addressed. Her understanding of certain advanced topics was incomplete, and her familiarity with recent research in related areas was limited by her restricted access to current mathematical literature. Elena realized that succeeding at the workshop would require not just defending her specific proof, but demonstrating comprehensive understanding of the broader mathematical context. Dr. Valdez's offer to serve as Elena's mentor during her workshop preparation was crucial in helping her develop the confidence and technical knowledge necessary to engage effectively with expert mathematicians. Their collaboration sessions focused on strengthening Elena's understanding of advanced algebraic techniques and helping her articulate the mathematical intuitions that had led to her breakthrough insights. The mathematical framework that Elena developed during her workshop preparation period would later be recognized as representing a significant advance in her theoretical understanding. Working with Dr. Valdez forced Elena to formalize mathematical insights that had previously existed only as intuitive understanding, creating rigorous logical foundations that could withstand expert scrutiny. Elena's growing confidence in her mathematical abilities was accompanied by increasing recognition that her unconventional background might actually represent an advantage rather than a limitation. Her approach to mathematical problems was unconstrained by traditional assumptions about what was or wasn't possible, allowing her to explore theoretical territories that more conventionally trained mathematicians might have avoided. The mathematical community's anticipation of Elena's workshop presentation created an atmosphere of expectation that extended far beyond the specific question of dynamic dimensional theory. Elena's situation had become symbolic of broader debates about mathematical education, institutional authority, and the nature of mathematical discovery. Her performance at the workshop would be interpreted as evidence for competing philosophies about how mathematical knowledge should be developed and recognized. Elena's final preparations for the workshop involved intensive practice sessions, where she presented her mathematical work to Dr. Chen and Dr. Valdez, refining her explanations and developing responses to potential criticisms. These practice Sessions revealed Elena's remarkable ability to think on her feet and adapt her mathematical arguments to address unexpected challenges. The workshop that would ultimately establish Elena as a legitimate mathematical researcher was still days away. But Elena had already begun to transform from an isolated autodidact into someone capable of engaging with the world's leading experts on equal terms. Her mathematical journey was approaching a crucial test that would determine whether brilliance could indeed overcome institutional prejudice, whether mathematical truth was more powerful than academic credentials. Elena Rodriguez was ready to prove that impossibility was just another mathematical problem waiting to be solved, but first she would need to convince the mathematical establishment that she deserved to be taken seriously as a researcher. The workshop that Dr. Chen had organized would provide Elena with her first real opportunity to demonstrate that mathematical genius could emerge from anywhere, even from a basement apartment where a blind teenager had taught herself to see mathematical relationships that Harvard's finest minds had missed. The auditorium at the Institute for Advanced Mathematical Studies fell silent as Elena Rodriguez made her way to the podium, her white cane tapping a steady rhythm against the polished floor. 300 of the world's most accomplished mathematicians had gathered for what many considered the most controversial presentation in recent academic history. Elena's invitation to speak at the International Workshop on Dimensional Theory had created a firestorm of debate within the mathematical community, dividing institutions and researchers who found themselves forced to choose between institutional loyalty and intellectual honesty. Elena had never spoken before such a distinguished audience. The weeks leading up to this moment had been filled with intensive preparation, but no amount of practice could have adequately prepared her for the weight of expectation that filled the room. She could hear the subtle sounds that indicated a packed auditorium, the rustle of papers, the soft conversations that died away as she approached the microphone, the expectant silence that seemed to press against her from all directions. Dr. Chen's introduction had been carefully crafted to establish Elena's credibility without drawing excessive attention to her unconventional background. She had presented Elena as the mathematician whose innovative approach to dimensional convergence had revolutionized understanding of fractional space theory, mentioning her collaborations with established researchers while avoiding discussion of her lack of formal academic credentials. Elena's opening words were delivered with a confidence that surprised even her closest supporters. She began not with apologies or explanations, but with mathematics itself, presenting the central insight that had led to her breakthrough in dimensional theory. Her voice carried clearly through the auditorium as she described how traditional approaches to fractional dimensions had failed because they treated dimensional parameters as fixed constraints rather than dynamic variables. The mathematical concepts Elena presented were complex enough to challenge even expert mathematicians, but her explanations possessed a clarity that made difficult ideas accessible. Years of developing mathematical intuition through non-visual means had forced Elena to understand concepts at a fundamental level that transcended surface complexity. She could explain sophisticated mathematical relationships because she truly understood them rather than simply memorizing formal procedures. Elena's presentation of her dynamic dimensional framework revealed the elegant simplicity that lay beneath what had appeared to be an impossibly complex mathematical problem. By treating dimensions as variables that could interact with the mathematical objects they contained, Elena had discovered that convergent behavior emerged naturally rather than requiring artificial constraints or special conditions. Her approach transformed the dimensional convergence conjecture from an unsolvable puzzle into an inevitable consequence of properly understood mathematical relationships. The audience's response to Elena's theoretical framework was immediate and dramatic. Mathematicians who had spent years struggling with traditional approaches to dimensional convergence found themselves confronting a completely new way of thinking about fundamental mathematical concepts. Elena's insight didn't just solve a specific problem, it opened entirely new territories for mathematical exploration that no one had previously imagined. Dr. Rebecca Harrison from Oxford, who had been one of Elena's most vocal critics, raised the first question during the discussion period. Her tone was respectful, but challenging as she asked Elena to clarify how dynamic dimensional theory related to established results in algebraic topology. Elena's response demonstrated not only her mastery of advanced mathematical concepts, but also her ability to think quickly and adapt her explanations to address unexpected challenges. Elena's answer to Dr. Harrison's question revealed the depth of her mathematical understanding in ways that surprised even her supporters. She didn't simply recite memorized facts or repeat arguments she had prepared in advance. Instead, Elena demonstrated the kind of flexible mathematical thinking that could only come from genuine comprehension of fundamental principles. Her ability to connect seemingly unrelated mathematical concepts revealed an intellectual sophistication that transcended formal educational credentials. The questions that followed covered the full spectrum of mathematical analysis, from technical details about Elena's proof methodology to broader theoretical implications of dynamic dimensional theory. Elena fielded each inquiry with confidence and precision, revealing a mathematical maturity that commanded respect from even her harshest critics. Her responses demonstrated that mathematical genius was indeed independent of institutional affiliation or formal training. Dr. Williamson, from Harvard, found himself in the uncomfortable position of questioning research that his own institution had rejected. His inquiries focused on the rigor of Elena's mathematical arguments and the adequacy of her proof techniques, but Elena's responses revealed that her work met or exceeded the standards typically expected from academic mathematical research. Dr. Williamson's questions became increasingly technical as he searched for flaws that simply didn't exist. Elena's defense of her mathematical work was masterful, not because she avoided criticism, but because she addressed every challenge directly and comprehensively. When Dr. Williamson questioned whether her proof techniques were sufficiently rigorous, Elena walked the audience through her logical arguments step by step, demonstrating the careful reasoning that supported every conclusion. When other critics suggested that her approach was too unconventional to be reliable, Elena showed how her methods connected to established mathematical principles in ways that traditional approaches had missed. The turning point in Elena's presentation came when she demonstrated a live application of her dynamic dimensional theory to solve a problem that had been proposed by Dr. Liu from MIT as an impossible test case. Working at the blackboard with chalk and her spatial intuition, Elena developed a solution in real time that left the audience stunned. Her ability to manipulate complex mathematical relationships without visual aids revealed a depth of mathematical thinking that few formally trained mathematicians could match. Elena's blackboard work was perhaps the most impressive aspect of her entire presentation. Using raised chalk marks that she could feel with her fingertips, Elena constructed mathematical diagrams and equations that were both visually elegant and logically precise. Her spatial organization of complex mathematical relationships demonstrated an understanding of mathematical structure that transcended sensory limitations. Elena wasn't just solving mathematical problems, she was revealing the fundamental patterns that made those solutions possible. The mathematical community's response to Elena's workshop presentation was immediate and overwhelming. Researchers, who had initially dismissed her work based on her lack of credentials, found themselves forced to acknowledge that Elena's mathematical insights were both original and profound. Her dynamic dimensional theory was clearly destined to become a cornerstone of advanced mathematical research, regardless of the institutional politics that had initially prevented its recognition. Dr. Harrison's public acknowledgement of Elena's mathematical accomplishments represented a significant shift in academic opinion. As one of Elena's most prominent critics, Dr. Harrison's admission that Elena's work exceeded the standards typically expected from established researchers carried enormous weight within the mathematical community. Her statement that Elena's insights had revolutionized our understanding of dimensional mathematics was quoted extensively in subsequent discussions. The immediate aftermath of Elena's presentation was chaotic as mathematicians crowded around her with questions, collaboration proposals, and expressions of admiration for her theoretical breakthrough. Elena found herself at the center of intense academic attention that was both gratifying and overwhelming. The recognition she had sought for so long was finally being offered, but the volume and intensity of interest exceeded anything she had anticipated. Dr. Chen's role during this period was crucial in helping Elena navigate the complex social dynamics of sudden academic celebrity. Elena needed guidance on how to evaluate collaboration opportunities, how to respond to media attention, and how to protect her ongoing research from premature exposure. The mathematical community's enthusiasm for Elena's work created new opportunities, but also new pressures that required careful management. The offers that flooded Elena's inbox in the days following her workshop presentation included faculty positions at prestigious universities, research fellowships, and collaboration opportunities with leading mathematicians from around the world. Elena found herself in the unusual position of being courted by institutions that had previously dismissed her work, creating both satisfaction and irony as she considered her options. Harvard University's attempt to recruit Elena as a visiting researcher represented the most dramatic reversal of institutional position. Dr. Williamson, who had signed the rejection letter for Elena's original proof submission, now found himself tasked with convincing Elena to accept a position at the university that had initially refused to recognize her work. The awkwardness of this situation was compounded by Elena's awareness that Harvard's interest was motivated more by embarrassment than by genuine appreciation for her mathematical contributions. Elena's response to Harvard's recruitment offer was polite but firm. She expressed appreciation for the university's interest while declining to pursue opportunities at institutions that had demonstrated such poor judgment in evaluating mathematical research. Elena's rejection of Harvard's offer sent a clear message to the academic community that mathematical talent couldn't be taken for granted, and that institutional prestige meant nothing without intellectual integrity. The mathematical journal that had originally rejected Elena's proof now found itself requesting permission to publish her work as a featured article. The editor's letter contained elaborate apologies for the earlier rejection and extensive praise for Elena's theoretical contributions. But Elena recognized the request as an attempt to capitalize on her newfound reputation rather than a genuine acknowledgement of her mathematical insights. Elena's decision about where to publish her groundbreaking research became a statement about values and priorities within the mathematical community. Instead of choosing established journals that would provide maximum prestige, Elena selected a newer publication that emphasized mathematical innovation over institutional connections. Her choice sent a clear message about the kind of mathematical community she wanted to help create. The broader implications of Elena's mathematical breakthrough extended far beyond the specific problem of dimensional convergence. Her success demonstrated that revolutionary mathematical insights could emerge from completely unexpected sources, challenging fundamental assumptions about how mathematical knowledge was developed and recognized. Elena's story became a catalyst for broader discussions about accessibility, education, and opportunity within academic mathematics. Elena's influence on mathematical education began almost immediately as teachers and professors started incorporating her insights into their curricula. Her approach to understanding mathematical relationships through non-visual intuition offered new possibilities for students who struggled with traditional visual-based instruction methods. Elena's techniques proved particularly valuable for students with learning differences who had previously been marginalized within mathematical education. The scholarship fund that Elena established with her speaking fees and research grants reflected her commitment to expanding access to mathematical education. The Elena Rodriguez Foundation provided support for mathematically talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering resources and mentoring that Elena herself had lacked during her educational journey. The foundation's work ensured that Elena's impact would extend far beyond her own research contributions. Elena's ongoing mathematical research continued to produce insights that pushed the boundaries of dimensional theory and related fields. Her collaboration with researchers from around the world created an informal network of mathematicians who shared her commitment to innovative approaches and inclusive practices. Elena's influence on mathematical research methodology was becoming as significant as her specific theoretical contributions. The documentary film about Elena's mathematical journey brought her story to audiences far beyond the academic community. The film's portrayal of Elena's struggles and triumphs resonated with viewers who saw in her experience a broader commentary on systemic barriers and individual determination. Elena's story became an inspiration for young people who felt excluded from traditional educational pathways. Elena's acceptance speech, when she received the Fields Medal equivalent for her mathematical contributions, was characteristically focused on mathematics rather than personal recognition. She used the platform to advocate for increased support for unconventional mathematical talent and to emphasize that mathematical discovery was too important to be limited by institutional prejudices. Elena's speech was widely quoted and became a rallying cry for educational reform. The research institute that Elena founded provided a new model for mathematical research that prioritized intellectual merit over institutional credentials. The Institute's unconventional approach to identifying and supporting mathematical talent attracted brilliant researchers who had been overlooked by traditional academic institutions. Elena's institute became a proof of concept for alternative approaches to organizing mathematical research. Elena's legacy within the mathematical community was already becoming apparent as her theoretical frameworks were being applied to solve previously intractable problems in multiple fields. Her dynamic dimensional theory had opened new research, directions that would keep mathematicians busy for decades. Elena's intellectual contributions were being recognized as foundational advances that would influence mathematical thinking for generations. The young mathematicians who sought Elena as a mentor represented the future of a discipline that was becoming more inclusive and innovative thanks to her example. Elena's mentoring style emphasized mathematical intuition and creative problem-solving over rote learning and credential accumulation. Her students were developing into researchers who combined technical sophistication with unconventional thinking. Elena's ongoing collaboration with Dr. Valdez had evolved into a research partnership that continued to produce groundbreaking results in abstract algebra and dimensional theory. Their joint work demonstrated how productive collaboration could emerged between researchers with very different backgrounds and training experiences. Elena and Dr. Valdez had become one of the most respected research teams in contemporary mathematics. The mathematical conference circuit had been transformed by Elena's presence as speakers, and organizers worked to create more accessible and inclusive events. Elena's requirements for participation had forced conference organizers to reconsider assumptions about how mathematical presentations should be structured and how research communities should be organized. Elena's influence was making mathematical conferences more welcoming for researchers with diverse backgrounds and abilities. Elena's apartment had been transformed from an isolated study space into a hub of mathematical activity as researchers from around the world visited to collaborate and learn from her unique approaches. The basement apartment that had once symbolized Elena's exclusion from mathematical community had become a destination for the world's most accomplished mathematicians. Elena's home had become a pilgrimage site for researchers who wanted to understand how mathematical genius actually developed. The mathematical notebooks that Elena had filled during her years of self-directed study were being preserved as historical documents that revealed the development of one of the most important mathematical minds of her generation. Elena's notebooks provided insight into how mathematical understanding could develop outside traditional educational structures, offering valuable lessons for educators and researchers interested in alternative approaches to mathematical learning. Elena Rodriguez had proved that mathematical impossibility was simply another problem, waiting for the right perspective to solve it. Her journey from rejected outsider to celebrated researcher had transformed not only her own life, but the entire mathematical community's understanding of where important discoveries could originate. Elena had shown that genius could emerge from anywhere, that mathematical truth was more powerful than institutional prejudice, and that the future of mathematics belonged to those brave enough to question established assumptions about how mathematical knowledge should be developed and recognized. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.